everybody, and welcome to the Heretic Hammer podcast. I am your host, Marshall, and this is my co-host, Dylan.
Hello, hello.
And today is about orcs. The sentient fungi of the 40k universe.
Oh, man.
We're in it today. It's time for some krumpin.
When I tell you I am so excited for this.
To begin this tale of lore, let us go back 10 million years prior to 40k. I know, crazy time. And this is around the time of the Old Ones, which, if you recall, they were the beings that initially were at war with the Necrons back in the War in Heaven. And they had created two races. Well, they created many, but two that are playable factions and relevant to 40k. And that is the Eldar, which we went over in the Origins episode. We'll go over on later. But then they also had created the Orks. So not orcs, but Orks. Which, you know, if you just add a KR in front of orcs,
not quarks.
Yeah, Orks.
Okay.
And somewhat similar to orcs in them being large, but they are effectively orcs, but 40 foot tall, and were effectively the warrior arm of the Old Ones' new races for the War in Heaven. You know, the Eldar were created, and they were kind of meant to be like the strategic and magic or, you know, psychic wielding ones. So essentially the wizards, you know, while the Orks were kind of like your barbarians. So they were like, you know, the ones who were just about like fighting and actual physical power.
Certainly.
But, you know, the problem was inevitably Eldar were the ones who kind of attained the power after the War in Heaven concluded and the Old Ones were gone. And the Orks, while they were intelligent, they weren't like as smart as, say, the Eldar. You know, like they could speak fluently, like they're not like orcs today. You know, they could, you know, so they could speak, but they weren't like master strategists. You know, they weren't like, they weren't big society builders. And without the guiding hand of the Old Ones, inevitably, as the eons went on, they effectively just degraded over time into the, you know, wild bunch of orc boys that we know and love today. Let's talk about orc biology, because there's kind of an important factoid about the orcs. And that is essentially that while they are called orc boys, they really don't have like any form of gender. They are literally like born from the ground like a crop.
Oh.
Yeah. So like the concept of like gender doesn't really exist. And actually there's kind of a discussion about like, so the way that orc kind of, to get more into their biology, throughout an orc life, and especially when they die, they release spores that plant themselves into the ground, like literal spores. And like when I said, when they die, like it explodes, so it's like even more spores. And so inevitably you kind of get this like field, small field, especially like if it was a battlefield for sure, where you'll kind of start seeing these kind of little bases of kind of what kind of seem like plants coming out of the ground. And so first come the squigs and the snotlings. So squigs are these kind of bipedal, almost dinosaur-like creatures. You know, they end up forming into various ways, you know, in different forms. You know, squigs are kind of a very ubiquitous kind of creature with the orcs. But the snotlings are like your straight up just like tiny goblin, like very tiny D&D goblin. Like I don't know if there's technically a smaller goblin in D&D. that I can remember, but if there was one, it technically would maybe be that. Like they're maybe like 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall at most, right? They're pretty tiny. And they kind of feed the squigs to the orc plants. And the next ones that'll pop up out of the ground will be called the Gretchen. And they're your more like standard goblin looking orc. When you see like a lot of times you'll see a picture of an orc, you'll see, like some smaller orc maybe hanging off of them, kind of at their feet, grabbing random stuff. That's a Gretchen.
Okay.
And they will start building what will become the orc camp and kind of getting all this scrap, especially because a lot of the times when these fields are formed, they're formed from battlefields where maybe a bunch of orcs died at one point. They'll just start grabbing all that scrap from the battlefield. Otherwise, if they're in the forest, they'll just start using wood and all that. And then finally, the orc will begin to arise and they'll kind of create tribes which grow and kind of shift and begin to wage war with other forming orc tribes until they inevitably pick their biggest orc and become a full war band and start going to war.
Is there like any sort of like a war chief that resides over multiple war bands, or are they all separate from each other?
So we'll get to that actually.
Okay.
But every time they win battles, more and more battles, they actually grow in size.
Specifically because they won in battle?
Seemingly, yes.
Okay.
There's not much great explanation for a lot of these orc things. These are just the observations that have been found, essentially, about orcs.
It is what it is. Okay.
Right. Like, it's hard to study orcs because they're so unpredictable in so many ways. Orcs themselves, generally, as you'll see them, they generally have larger arms than they do their legs, especially the larger, just total upper torso. Large, very strong heads, and they actually have regenerative ability. Like they can literally lose their heads and have them either sewn back onto a body, theirs or someone else's, or just to a giant machine, effectively, like making them just like a head on a orc robot.
Because they're more like a fungus than they are like a humanoid that, needs the brain and the brainstem to function.
Yeah, seemingly. Like it's while they have blood and they have so many traits of a normal like humanoid-esque organism, they just have all this extra like regenerative ability that gives them a great amount of power. And I mean, inevitably that kind of comes from the old ones giving them this ability. But that is something that kind of comes into that, right? Like where a lot of these traits were once designed kind of with some sense with the quirks and now have degraded in some way over time. And so now they've kind of become this. And so because they were created by the old ones, they also have psychic ability. They just don't really realize it as much as everyone else, because they kind of manifest them differently. So like, a Space Marine librarian or an Eldar, especially a warlock, they'll, have lightning come out of their arms or their hands, and they'll shoot fire, or they'll use telekinetic, abilities. The only ones that maybe do that type of stuff are called weird boys, but otherwise orcs manifest things in a way. So like a real example is, an orc, when they are born, they're not taught how to build a truck or a gun or a robot hand.
Well, sure, you wait until they're about 2 or 3 years old.
But they come out and they just like instinctively know how to do this stuff. And a lot of this kind of comes from almost this just like passed down consciousness, almost like from their kind of psychic ability. It's not super well explained, but like one of the things that has kind of come around is a lot of myths because of this, right? Because there is inevitably a time where, there are myths that are around that are like, an orc who's like, there are a bunch of orcs on a truck and they're going down the road and they run out of gas. And, the one driving goes, "Hey, boss, we're out of gas." And, the boss will be like, "No, we ain't. I put gas in it just an hour ago." And all the other orcs will be like, "Yeah, he did do that. The boss wouldn't be wrong." And then they'll start the truck and it'll start.
Well, yeah, okay, no. So this is important. I'm really glad that we're already getting to this point. So me being me, outside of the community, not super familiar with the game or the lore, I have heard this phenomenon, I guess we can call it, a number of times. And every time I'm like, that doesn't make sense. How does that work? Because essentially what you're describing is that the orcs specifically have this like kayfabe field around them, like they're a wrestler. And they can just be like, "No, this happens because it's this color," or we can fix this machine because we know how to, and yes, and then it's just fixed and it works because they will it into existence and they make it happen with their mind. And I've never understood how any of that actually works. I've just heard like bits and pieces here and there, just like, yeah, orcs can basically manifest, like they are constantly manifesting and they are making things happen as they want it to happen, and it's so confusing. So please continue to explain what the hell this is. What is this about?
Yeah, so it's like half correct, right? Like, so they are not. So the truck story, right, is not really how it works. If they run out of fuel, they will run out of fuel, right? But the things that they'll do to, make some type of new engine or strap something else on or whatever, that's where that kind of comes in, right? They have this just kind of mythos, like, it's kind of honestly almost like a hive mind, but like the dumbest hive mind you could probably think of. Like, it doesn't have a specific goal. It's just somehow they've all, like, they just psychically are linked enough to where when one orc has figured out how to do and build one thing, all the rest of them just attain it upon their creation. And they may not know it. They don't think, they don't come out of the ground and are like, "Oh, I'm going to build this." They just start doing it without thinking. There's no mind put to it. They're just like, "What you building?" "Oh, I'm building the shooter." "Oh, how you doing that?" "I'm just building the shooter." "Shut up."
It's just intuitive.
Smacks him with an axe.
Intuitive.
Yeah, that's completely what it is. And again, the other kind of part of the myth, being one that was once brought up in an Adeptus Ridiculous episode, which is a fun story and in a way could be true in some respect because of the way it works, which is the classic "I'm a tank" meme. I don't know if you've heard this one.
I don't think I have.
So the story goes that there were a number of guardsmen and they were fighting orcs, but the guardsmen run out of ammo and they go, "Shit, we're out of ammo. We're going to die." And one of our guardsmen goes, "Wait, I heard about something. Let me try it." And he just like puts out his gun, no ammo in it, but he just starts going bang, 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 bang. And the orcs start falling down, dying as it seems. And somebody says like "grenade," and they throw they throw a rock and they go boom, and then a bunch of orcs fly away, like they fling themselves, seemingly also dying still. And like the orcs don't ever get up. They're just kind of remaining dead. And parts of it go on, like they have a back and forth. And then eventually, they're shooting at a number of orcs. Like there's like 6 orcs kind of all in a big square, just kind of trudging towards them. And they are yelling bang, 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 but they're not doing anything. Nothing's working. And then all of a sudden you just hear the rumbling begin to come towards them as the group of orcs come closer, as you hear the words, "I'm a tank, I'm a tank, I'm a tank, I'm a tank, I'm a tank." So in believing that they're a tank, that they're immune
to
these psychotic bullets.
I'm sorry. Am I to believe that the orcs of Warhammer 40K, not only are they not at all like the orcs you would see in Warcraft or in other various fantasy stories, the orcs of Warhammer 40K are literally just a comedy improv group that would normally be operating out of LA and playing shows at like 8 p.m. on Tuesdays. Like, all they're doing is just like improvised acting and making it real through the power of their improvisation. Like, so, that is no, because we've already covered a lot of absurd things, and this just stands out as like really. Like, I'm fully expecting you to say that, like, they all came up with their, like, I'm a tank, and you could see the, like, comedy sports t-shirts that they're wearing. Like, this is really out there, even for everything that we've talked about so far.
Right, and so that's why I said, no. And like I said, the only way that this would work is, like, a half-truth. And that would be like maybe a guardsman could get away with this by tricking an orc mentally by yelling bang, 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 and they fall down. But they wouldn't literally be dead. They would be thinking they're dead. Like literally to the point where potentially an orc would be like, what are you doing? And he'd be like, I'm dead. I got shot. And the other orc would then just be like, oh, damn, that's a shame, and leave. I mean,
that's almost hypnosis at that point. That's like a self-inflicted hypnosis.
And so, like, the concept of them all kind of getting into this playscape mindset then of yelling, saying to themselves they're a tank and, trudging towards them, again, like, this is from, like, this, that could work from at least just the sense of, obviously, it's just, like, they're so kind of dumb that, like, you could trick them that way. But that itself, like that story is a myth. Like it's not actually in a book or anything like that. It's just kind of like this folklore thing, that especially got perpetuated by Adric. But, like I said, like that's a great story to tell about like how while the orcs have, can be fooled and can use their will for a lot of things between the truck and the tank kind of stories, they... which inevitably I both got from Bricky, but still, they're good to at least denote how they have a monicum of truth in them, but they don't perfectly showcase how the orcs' kind of psychic power work. It's just more that like they have this kind of connection, and it kind of placates back to how their intelligence used to form and how they're kind of innately designed from a biological and psychic standpoint from the old ones to be these perfect warriors. But because they've degraded, it kind of sits in the back of their minds and it kind of manifests itself in different ways. And so that's kind of where it's like always like a half-truth with a lot of these myths with an orc, where it's like parts of it could be used to be believable, but a lot of it is generally just silliness, right? It's because orcs are a really good group to make silly stories out of, and that thus makes it simpler to have myths be placated as truths with the orcs, when that's not always the case. Like this, the I'm a tank meme is a meme, but it's a decent meme because they do have strong imaginations. They're just not as literal. Like when if you read an orc book, which there's actually a number of good ones that have come out in the last number of years in the kind of modern era.
Can orcs read? It feels important to
there's probably
know that.
There's probably like two that probably could.
That's good.
But they wouldn't. I don't know. They would want to bother.
And do they just go, I'm reading, and it just counts?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So let's get into orc culture though a little bit.
Fantastic.
So orcs are all about the
So I've heard. I've heard that a few places here and there.
Yeah. They care only for fighting and are quite bored when they're not.
No. No. I'm cutting you off right there. I need you to spell that for me.
It depends how long you hold it. But the general spelling would be like WAA at minimum, GH, and then at minimum 3 exclamation points.
Just one G. WAA.
Again, these are minimums. This is probably like the minimal
Single
way
H.
you could spell it.
I know.
This is the minimal way. You can
Sure,
add as
but,
many
like,
of those as you want.
Yes, but I'm your faithful student here. I'm learning. I want to make sure that I'm getting this accurate, you know.
Well, right, and that's what I'm saying. Like, this is like the minimal. This is as short as you can spell it.
Yeah.
Everything else, though, can be added ad nauseum, ad infinitum.
Mm-hmm.
You can have infinite numbers of any of these letters if you wish it.
Just like the Orks do. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so because of this kind of boredom when they're not fighting, this ends up leading to a lot of infighting. And it is honestly said that the Orks would probably take full control and destroy the galaxy if they weren't so busy killing each other.
Okay. Yep.
Like, they are rivaled only probably by the Tyranids, which are a race of, hive-minded sentient bugs, borderline sentient bugs, that literally just consume the life forms of a planet. Like, everything. And they're maybe only second to them in terms of, like, they honestly might have more than the Tyranids that exist in the, like, galaxy that 40K takes place in. So, one important thing to note about the Orks is one thing in their folklore. And that is of the great Gork and Mork.
I'm sorry.
Gork and Mork.
Gork and Mork. Okay. So, Mork and Mindy. Yep.
I'm going to read this verbatim. So, the Greenskins believe in the two gods, Gork and Mork. Gork, who the Orks say is brutal but cunning, and Mork, who is cunning but brutal. That makes sense?
Okay.
So, what that comes down to is essentially the two things that Gork and Mork represent reality, and, like, especially when we get into the game sense, is kind of generally like shooting and somewhat strategy, and like somewhat, and like orc strategy, and melee and brutality, right? Like the pure just like cleave, taking my axe and cleaving through, a swath of people.
So for us, inside of us are two wolves. For the Orks, outside of them are two orcs. And also they're fighting each other all the time.
Yes. Some say that,
okay.
Again, some, like, there's one of the lore kind of myth or theory things is like that Gork and Mork, you could find them in the realm of chaos in the warp because all gods, when there is like a god in 40K, that means that like they will manifest. If you believe a deity will exist, they will manifest. And there's theories around that with the Emperor because of the Imperium and all that religiousness there. Mm-hmm. So, the gods of the Orks exist, and some say that they are literally in the warp, like in the realm of Khorne, but that they are effectively like put into this pit, and while they could maybe get out and do something to fight Khorne, they're too busy fighting each other.
Okay.
To stop and do something about it.
All right.
But otherwise, orc culture is kind of all set up into, as we talked about, you'll see a war band, which will inevitably become or join with a clan. And all clans are led by a war boss, which is the biggest orc out of them all in the clan. Some would say that maybe like the the most prominent, maybe over a number of all the clans, is the orc WAAAGGH. But that is, because orcs are orcs, not is not something you should kind of sit on. Like, don't go to a group of 40k people and be like, yeah, so that the leader of all the orcs, WAAAGGH, they'll laugh at you. While he is one of the most prominent orc war bosses that exist, to say that there ever could truly only be one singular top war boss is just kind of naive when it comes to orcs. Because I'm gonna be honest with you, most orcs probably even haven't heard of WAAAGGH until he shows up, and then they see how big he is, and they're like, I'm following you. So it's one of those things where WAAAGGH does only need to show up, and suddenly he gets respected and a whole clan working with him. But many orcs don't actually know who he even is, because many of them were probably only born yesterday. But the clans are important to talk about, because there are a number, while there's plenty of clans that could exist in the universe, there are some of the most prominent. So let's start off with the first clan, which is possibly the one you'll see the most of in like artwork, and especially on like the covers of all the 40k bits and stuff, is the Bad Moons. Traditionally in the color of yellow, because color is actually very important to orcs. They have a lot of belief with it. But the thing the Bad Moons care about the most is teeth. The orc currency. Yes, they like teeth, like your literal teeth, except
but
teeth.
With an F.
Yeah, and they're fairly generalist. They do work best with a lot of shooty units, and you'll find them with a lot of DACA.
Okay, so it's DACA.
Yes, that's essentially their shooting. That is DACA.
Shooting is DACA. Okay.
Yeah, and they care the most about their appearance. Like, they will put teeth around their neck. They'll actually maybe clean and polish their stuff up. Maybe try to make it look good to an orc, which to an imperialist probably would look still ugly as sin, but to an orc, it's a beautiful masterpiece. Take that for what you will.
I mean, that's just giving punk vibes, which I'm pretty cool with.
And then you'll also then find the Death Skulls, who they like vehicles. You will find them in the color blue, which is the lucky color. They're kind of pirate-esque in the sense that they like vehicles, and this is vehicles of all kinds, so like choppas, trucks, even any type of vehicle, bikes, anything, whether it's fast or slow. And they will often steal any of those vehicles from their allies and enemies alike. And then we've got the evil sons, which they're the speed freaks. They love to go fast, and they will literally fight in race cars. Like, it is just straight up death race,
Mad Max.
just like
okay.
NASCAR with guns, whatever you want to put to it.
So NASCAR.
Hey, look, they don't have guns in NASCAR, okay?
Just around it. So yeah, evil sons, and their color is red.
Yes, because the red ones go faster.
Okay, and this is another, like, they manifest that, therefore it's true.
Again, half truth, because they believe the color red makes something go fast. What they'll often end up doing is building a vehicle that is fast as a whole.
And they just happen to paint it red. Okay.
Or they do paint it red because of it or whatever, right? Like, it's with an orc, it's always this kind of mix of their manifestation, right? They almost kind of will like manifest the speed on their own, so they made it red, so they'll build it faster without thinking about it, or because it is fast, they make it red. So, but then it's already fast. So yeah, stuff like that. Just by it, it's not one of those things where like it was this speed and then they painted it red and suddenly it goes this speed. Again, if anything, maybe they drive it faster, right? There's, maybe they weren't giving it the full kilt before, but then they painted it red and suddenly they are. It's always kind of a play with them, but that is kind of the main thing is like great meme, half truth, right?
Okay.
And then you've got your snake bites. One of my favorite things or favorite types of orc factions. So they almost have very little to no modern technology. You'll find them generally with just melee weapons. If anything, if they have DACA, it's very simple. Maybe just like a pistol or something like that. But they won't ride, they won't use like vehicles or whatever. They will literally ride on what are called squigosaurs, which are squigs, but to the size of a dinosaur.
Squigosaurs.
Yeah, and I mean they're so good. I mean, look at that squigosaur.
No, they're great. That sure is a Yoshi. If I ever did see one, that's a proper Yoshi to have. It's honestly giving like Tremors 2, the very specific version of the graboids from like Tremors 2.
I only ever watched the first one.
Okay, well that's fine, but also you'll just have to take my word for it until we do our Tremors podcast.
God no.
And I explain all the lore to you, and I explain how they gained the power of flight in Tremors 3.
Here it is in the Hunter rig.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. That's dope. I'm with it. I like it. I like the spikes. Good spikes going on.
I love the squigosaurs. I mean, inherently, I think there should just be more, dinosaurs in 40K. There is the lore for it. Yeah, there is the lore for it, so it should exist.
Everything is made better with dinosaurs. I think we know this by now.
I can understand obviously why, Age of Sigmar, the fantasy series, gets it, but like, come on. Mm-hmm. We have the Eldari Exodites and they ride dinosaurs. Let's bring them in officially instead of me having to 3D print them. So then next up, we're going to talk about the blood axes. So they are the most disliked by orcs because they are the most human-like in their battle tactics. Because they will choose to retreat if they're losing a fight. They will be just straight-up mercenaries to anyone that's willing to pay them. A lot of the other orc clans think of them not as orcs because of that. The thought of running from battle is, cowardly and just not in orc nature.
If they're like willing to retreat and they use like humanoid tactics, why are they called the blood axes?
Because you know what? They still bloody. They are. That doesn't, just because they use those tactics doesn't make them any less strong and powerful and inherently bloody their axes. And then, so next is the freebooters, which are technically like the name of one type of clan, but not like if you're a freebooter, you're not part of like one large organization. It's kind of like a label. But essentially, any orcs who are freebooters are essentially pirates that are also then for hire just as well. But generally just orcs, and they will be far more willing to loot, fight, and steal for whatever they want. So kind of like how the Death Skulls will just kind of steal vehicles from their allies, the freebooters will also do so, and they're not specifically attached to a clan. So that's why they'll kind of float around amongst other clans. And yeah, you will definitely see them in a number of art with pirate hats and the like.
I love this. I am immediately, yes. Orc pirates, I'm sold. I'm immediately in.
Yeah, freebooters are, and the nice part about freebooters too is somewhat similarly to, especially like if you maybe don't mind a lot of the tactics that the bad sons give you, or like the kind of freedom of it, because a lot of detachments will kind of be like themed off of clans and stuff in the actual game.
Mm-hmm.
If you kind of like what the bad moons do in their generalisty kind of sense, you can kind of get that with your freebooters, but without some of the pompousness that's in their lore and some extra little tidbits, maybe depending on kind of what edition throws in for freebooter style detachments.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned, orcs have a lot of belief in color. Obviously, it's all dependent on just whatever a clan wants to kind of use as their main color or what they most like stick with. As we know, they believe red is a fast color, blue is lucky, yellow is tied to thinking that you'll be wealthy, and purple is stealthy. And the way we know that is, have you ever seen a purple orc? Bet you haven't.
So blue is lucky. Purple is
the last
stealth.
one, kind of a joke.
I'm writing it down. I don't care. I'm writing it down.
My favorite is the joke that people would run, or that somebody would build an army. Like, you'll see it where they'll just have a bunch of bases on the table, and then they'll say, "My purple orc army is coming along nicely." All right, so let's talk about the WAAAGGH. I'm not gonna yell it this time.
Yeah, we gotta wait from that for a bit. Let's get back to the meat and potatoes here.
Yeah. So as we've kind of discussed, orcs generally choose or focus on either DAAAGGH or fighting.
Mm-hmm.
So this is especially to kind of start getting into game stuff too, right? This kind of melds as a discussion, because obviously the way that orcs fight in lore is similar to how they fight in game. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of dissonance. So orc DAAAGGH is not very great, but they shoot a lot, and when they do hit, it hurts. So it's kind of like that, the spray and pray method of shooting for them. Gotcha. So one of the things they used to get was something called sustained sixes, which meant like whenever you rolled a die with an orc shooting, you would hit only on a 5 or 6. And remember, you just use D6s in 40K. But if you rolled a 6, you got to shoot again. So you got to like add another shot.
Okay.
So you could there were some editions where you can almost have just an almost infinite number of shots.
I was about to ask if it stacks and you can just keep
not anymore.
Getting sixes.
Yeah, okay. Not anymore. If something is sustained, it's just the 1/6 is sustained, and if you roll a 6 on that, it's just another guaranteed hit. But that doesn't stack now. People have made me believe that in previous editions that was the case, but I didn't play those editions, so I don't know for sure.
Gotcha.
Nevertheless, that's why you will generally see that they have lots of guns on anything that they have, because until they can get close to you, they might as well just shoot a bunch because it ain't accurate. Thus, why you will then see them using a lot of vehicles. And again, probably what fits into the reason why they're not so accurate is all those vehicles and weapons are made of scrap. So they also have a very random aesthetic when you look at them, right? That's kind of why the cleanest looking orcs, in terms of just having less jank, is going to be your snake bites or any of your essentially cavemen orcs. Because if you look at the cars, they can seem kind of, if you're used to the Mad Max look, seem kind of normal. Mm-hmm. But then you'll look at the Gorkanaut and the Morkanaut, and you're like, what on earth is this? Which makes them a great army for kit bashing. Orcs have a lot of really old kits, like models and stuff, which can make them look a little old and ugly sometimes. But what you get with all of these orc, kits and stuff is a lot of bits. And so orcs are just made to kit bash. And especially if you like say orcs is like your second army that you're collecting, have you got some random bits from like an imperial kit? Throw them on an orc, you know? They found this thing, right? You can really play with an orc and how you design them, because they already are jank as it is. So no one's going to bat an eye when an orc has something weird. Or if like you break something while you're modeling or whatever, well, that's just an orc. He broke it. They're a wonderful army in that sense. Like I said, the downside is they're a little old in that regard, but they're great kid bashers. But as I kind of alluded to, you know, one of their biggest strong points is their melee. You know, they will hit hard often and well. They, you know, like orcs kind of get like this like thought as being like the especially like RNG army, but that's only really true with their shooting because they're hitting only on 5 and 6, whereas there are plenty of orcs that will hit on their melees and with, you know, a 2-up or 3-up, which are pretty good, you know, pretty good odds. So they're hitting a lot in melee and they'll hit pretty hard. Especially a lot of their abilities allow for like cleaving, so hitting more than one unit, stuff like that. And when the orcs go into battle, and as we kind of have always known them, whenever you see anything orc related in a video, you know, and you hear their cries for wah, this cry actually gives kind of like a psychic wave of energy that gives strength to the whole army.
It's a bardic inspiration. It's like a rousing, like a speech.
Yeah. Kind of, yeah. Except just one simple word. And this can have some devastating results in game. This, like in 10th edition, this gives them, you know, the ability to, you know, not be taken down significantly, you know, harder. Like it takes a lot more to get them down. And they will hit more accurately in some ways, or at least more often. Otherwise, some of the other fun things is the squigs, outside of just the snake bites, are rather important to all orcs. So the snake bites, which we went over, they use the squigosaurs for mounts, chariots, you know, just, you know, having a fun caveman riding dinosaurs kind of feel. But like the junkyard orcs, which is, you know, pretty much like all the other orcs that aren't these kind, they will often use squigs for like bombs. You know, Gretchen will sometimes ride them into battle to like have them like chomp at smaller targets or just like normal sized humies. But like the bomb squig is like a really important one, or like common one that you'll see in the battlefield. They just literally like attach a thing of C4 to a squig and are like, go to them and explode.
Oh my god.
No, it won't even be like a C4. It'll literally be like Yoshis. Putting a thing of like TNT, like with a fuse on it.
Yeah, God forbid,
sending it out.
God forbid it be sophisticated in any way. No, yeah. Can't have that.
No, it's got to blow up at a completely random time. Now in game, obviously you can choose the time, but in media and whatnot, you'll always see it that way. But otherwise, a lot of their vehicles will get inspirations from, you know, kind of human tech. One thing you'll see in especially kind of their codex cover in the back is called the Death Dread, which is like essentially like an orc saw a dreadnought from a space marine and was like, I want something like that. So they just built this big mech suit and called
the
it
giant
Death
Truckosaurus
Dread.
in the background there. Yeah.
You know, and unlike, while it is piloted by an orc, unlike the human, that orc is fully alive and can get out of that Death Dread when they wish to.
Gotcha.
Or they can't. Or maybe sometimes they can't. You know, nothing's going to say they can't. Otherwise, I mean, they have choppas and trucks, which literally are in even their normal vehicles, or like their normal, like their speed vehicles. Like, they, you know, didn't have them really before meeting the Imperium, but now they do, and they have them. Otherwise, there's a couple of big mechs. We went over the Gorkanaut and the Morkanaut, which are incredibly special in their own ways. They have these, and these are quite large, right? These are about the size of, you wouldn't have too much context for this, but they are about the size of an Imperial Knight, which essentially is maybe like the size of like, a tall city building, not like full skyscraper, but like maybe like 6-7 stories tall, maybe 5 at their shortest. And then they have the Stompa, which is their Titan.
My God.
Like, this thing is huge. This would be the size of a full-on skyscraper. It's probably about the size of one of the smaller Titans that exist for the Imperium.
So how many thousands of dollars is this, by the way?
How much is the Stompa on its own, like as a model?
Yeah.
Let's find that out.
So
as I mentioned in a recent episode, I cut that out. Because I didn't feel like it was relevant. So recently, Orks got a kind of big value box, right? And it was about like, it's a lot less than I thought it was. But it's probably honestly because they want to fucking get rid of it.
140. Okay, yeah, that is also less than I thought it'd be.
Yeah, well, because here's let's pull up the Titan here. So it's equal size equivalent for the Imperium.
Okay, see, that's more,
and that's
more like
only for not the arms. Like that's for the body.
What?
The arms are not included.
Come on now.
But you can open up and there's little men inside.
Well, yeah, it's a Megazord.
The Titan, the Imperial Titans thing, that honestly, that goes into a whole discussion. Which, if we can get into a Titans episode, we'll get to. But honestly, it's if anything, that's going to be one of the last episodes we do. Because no one realistically is getting into 40K to play Titans. Because you can't even play them in a normal 2,000 point game. Like, you could maybe play one Titan and then some like smaller units, but they'd have to be pretty small, and it would be really weird, and it wouldn't go well. The Stompa is a little different. It gets a little bit of extra benefit to itself. But like, so we saw the Stompa was $140. It got put into a value box recently that was worth $230.
Wow.
So it was, you're essentially paying only $90 for about, I think it was like 3 boxes worth of Orks and then the $140 for the Stompa. So from that perspective, the box was like a crazy good value, because that went from essentially spending, if you want a Stompa, you pay one. You think about it, you're paying the $140, but then what would have maybe been $120 worth of, no, that math is wrong. $180 worth of Orks, $150, $180 worth of Orks, you were paying $90. You're paying half as much. So that's why people like that box. But yeah, they use some stuff. And so getting to them specifically in 10th edition, as they are now, I'm going to lower the amount I talk about 10th, because obviously eventually 10th is going to be replaced by 11th, so on and so forth, but these will stay up. But still somewhat sits into their the orc ways of fighting. So currently, it's actually a great time at the release and recording of this episode to be an orc fan, because they're going to be getting their codex soon. And it's coming out with a lot of detachments that's very useful and good and fun, which is the important part. So they have like a great Speed Freaks detachment, so you can bust out all your fast cars. They have good collecting boxes coming out. Otherwise they have one really important core orc concept in this detachment. It was missing in the last one, but they're bringing it back, which is nice. Which is called the Green Tide, which is what it sounds like. Just a large swath of orc boys just to hoard onto the board and just overwhelm people with numbers. And that is often how the orcs are. They'll just wave into the battlefield, just numerous and defiant.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like as I kind of related to earlier, Orks is still kind of like, with their shooting, is a little bit like gambling, but you've kind of just loaded some of the die, right? You know, it's just enough for you to win the way you want to win, but maybe not enough for it to be so obvious that you've tilted the scales in your favor and then it's not fair, right? And that's kind of where the Orcs seem to be in a good balance. And that's kind of how they always just played too. They've always kind of been like that, and that's kind of always generally been their goal as a designs front. But yeah, so one thing that's kind of important to know about always being an orc player, no matter what edition it is you can't be a sweaty orcs player. You just can't. Because you're going to get disappointed. Things are going to happen. You know, there are so many things that can go wrong when you're playing orcs. You kind of just got to learn to roll with the punches, which is a great learning thing for the game, you know, is to learn how to roll with the punches. But you can absolutely just get ruined in rolls. The friend that I learned to play the game with, he is an orc player. And in the number of games that we've played with each other since 10th came out, he has won most of them. But the ones that I have won, mix of good strategy, obviously. If I don't have good strategy, I'm still not going to win because it's a points game in the end. But inevitably, the last one specifically came down, a lot of it ended up coming down to me getting a really good early advantage because he just couldn't hit the broadside of a barn before he got into melee, and I could. But that's the thing with sisters, they're a lot more accurate. They're gonna hit more often. It's just orcs will like save and not take as much damage. But he just couldn't hit anything until he got into melee range. So you have to learn to be adaptable and also just to be chill when you're playing the orcs. But again, if you're going to be sweaty, why play the orcs? The orcs aren't sweaty. The orcs are just there for a good time, which includes murdering everything in sight. But, you know, and that's kind of the important thing to bring up too, is, you know, the thing is, you know, I always bring this up, right? Kind of like in their own way, every faction in 40K is evil. And the orcs are technically, I'd say, one of two factions that you could probably lump into the not really evil concept, right? They're evil in the sense that they are obviously warmongering creatures that will slaughter every living being in sight, including themselves, right? They don't have that type of sympathy to like look at a child, you know, in you know, this city that they're invading and be like, I'll spare you, scared child. No, they're just, you know, like they don't have that. They're just there. They're there to kill and slaughter. But they're not doing it for the sense of like wanting to kill. They're not wanting to do it to create suffering. They're doing it because that's what gives them joy. It's just fun. There's nothing like a good old-fashioned krumpin. And that's what they want to do. And so that, like I said, their intentions aren't explicitly evil. And while they're, you know, while the way that they do it is pretty brutal, it's not from like, they're not doing it from a sadistic standpoint.
Okay.
And there's one other army that kind of fit in a similar category, but that's kind of the nice part about the orcs, and I think why they really fit in that comic relief aspect is that, you know, it's kind of because they're not really all that evil. they're just the orcs, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They talk funky, and all they want to do is get to krumpin.
Wild. Absolutely wild. I can't tell you how glad I am to have a lot more of the context around like how they exist. It feels like a bunch of like fill in the blanks that have been filled in because of how popular orcs are in the 40K community as a whole. And it's just like all these things now having context, and I don't know about making sense. I don't know if I could say that like, oh yeah, now that makes sense. But I understand.
No, the orcs, while the myths make them seem way crazier than they are, they're still pretty nuts.
Mm-hmm.
You're not getting away from the fact that they are the definition of grim derp in 40K.
Okay.
But I mean, that sense of realism is important to the orcs because it is really easy for people to forget that they are honestly still terrifying. Like if orcs showed up out on our planet tomorrow, we'd be terrified. It would be awful.
Absolutely.
Like they're horrifying creatures, but it's just because of what is all around 40K, right? When you have this somewhat more simple and kind of dumb creature base, when it's surrounded by everything else that also kind of sucks, it makes it seem not as bad. And that's the thing, right? Like everything about 40K, as we kind of talked about with the naming scheme in the last episode with the Admech, there's always like the very serious thing that exists in lore, and then there's the silly thing that the fan base will create out of it. And for the orcs, that's kind of their, while relatively realistic portrayal of like the way they act and think and speak, still fairly goofy demeanor.
The orcs, I mean, it's all these different tribes with their own, all these war bands with their own leaders. At the top of this discussion, I was trying to get a sense of like, was there a chief or a leader that like sees over like the large majority? And the answer is no. I'm trying to think about like where is the future of the orcs, unless it is just to essentially fight forever and to just like waging battles between themselves with other war bands and tribes, and like there's no, like you brought up Thraka earlier. As far as we're aware, do they have like a specific goal in mind of like, I want to accomplish this, or I am trying to fight for this particular goal, or like is it all just kind of aimless?
I mean, Ghazghkull, so he currently is in a strange state. He's got a very large, he has a supremely large warband. He was one of the orc war bosses that has been trying to take over Armageddon. I mean, he's crossed paths with a great number of Imperial characters. That guardsman commissar we talked about that like had the orc give him the arm, that was Ghazghkull. But at the moment he's kind of disappeared into space a bit. He's even done fights with Commander Farsight of the Tau. So like he he seemingly has somewhat of a goal, obviously, to try to continue to get Armageddon. But also he seems to just be really content into trying to continue and just dominate through, all of the space that he can get. Because as it's kind of just unfortunately broken down to, and this is kind of, I guess, if anything, the tragedy of the orc, is that they're only, because the only thing that has survived from their quirk or origins is their willingness to wage war. And they, therefore, will are going to just continue to do that until there is no war to be fought.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to say. Yeah, I mean, they really don't have kind of a greater goal outside of maybe, a couple warbands that maybe have a thought or two, right?
Well, that's a weirdly solemn note to leave things on, but
yeah, I mean, it's, they're, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, but they always serve great as the comedic punchline. But I guess maybe to give then a little bit of light to that fact, right? If you ever do want to get a little bit of extra, kind of foot or kind of like insight into orc minds, or especially the like minds of their leaders, there are a good number of recent books that have come out with orcs. So there's a newest one, which, so obviously I can't speak to it, but there's a newest one coming out called WAAAAGGH. But
Big Daka.
three of the kind of most notable that have come out, which still kind of sit a little bit into the kind of grim derpiness that the orcs have, but also not, is Brutal Cunning, which is very well liked by the fan base. War Boss, which it gives you a little bit more of that kind of cultural insight. And then as kind of we've talked about a little bit, WAAAGGH, the book about him, which that one specifically maybe actually starts to then get into a little bit more about maybe some, I don't know, like a little bit of philosophy with the orcs. You just kind of, you do at least kind of get a little bit of some insight into that and into WAAAGGH's own ambitions.
I love this aspect of Warhammer 40K, where it's like, I mean, obviously the game is the thing. It's all about the game, but also that you can just as easily be like, and here's your book recommendations for the week,
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely love to be able to do like a 40K book club. But that's always the funny part, right? Yeah, because like all this lore is like a function to try to get you right to buy the models for the game,
consume
right?
the product. Yes,
it's this weird type of marketing, right? That like it's such like this strange concept to like have this like whole ass like scheme of just like, we're gonna have this entirely large department in build to create this massive series of books so that we can try to get people to buy our plastic models and play a tabletop game.
It's
like it didn't work.
It's like making an anime to sell your trading cards.
Right, exactly. But like, damn if it didn't work in both instances, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I mean, and it's so funny because you think about like Magic, where that really didn't work, right? And some of it maybe is because maybe they didn't either commit long enough, or they just didn't get maybe enough writers or whatever. Because like Warhammer has been writing books for a long time, so they are, so maybe it's just like a little bit of writing. But like they've had so many years to write these books. They've also kind of ironed it out, because there are bad 40K books, and let me tell you,
oh sure,
people have found them, people have written them, people have read them. There are bad 40K books. There are recent bad 40K books, maybe 30K technically with the Horus Heresy series, but like they exist.
Any sci-fi, like you look at like Halo and Resident Evil, like those are also examples where like people have written a ton of like expanded universe books. You look at Star Wars, how many like expanded universe like Star Wars books were written, and a lot of them are terrible.
Yeah,
like they're just not good.
Yeah, you always had to go into the you always had to like go and find out.
Yeah,
like,
you got to dig through the weeds to find the real good stuff.
Orks have some great books out now. Generally, the ones you'll find coming out and in stores are going to be good. Any of them by Mike Brooks have been elated and just given a great, review cycle. So you're good there. There's some great lore to go feast upon. That's extra. That's more than we can cover here. But that's going to do it for this episode. Next week, we're going to talk about the one that the internet has probably all gotten over by the time it comes out. The Custodes.
The Custodes. Okay.
There's a reason I want to talk about them, though, before what I was going to do that I maybe was going to do just before that. There's a reason I want to talk about them after Custodes with the Imperium. But we'll start with the Custodes first. I'll get into the reason why I'll go to the next Imperial army after that when we talk about it. But for now, Custodes are next. Something will be after that. And, it'll keep going.
I was waiting for like a definitive end to that statement.
Didn't know, yeah. No, I was like, I could keep going. I'm going to stop.
All right. So next time
we'll
will be Custodes.
Next week. Yes.
All right. Say it now.
So we'll
say it.
See you then.
Yep. Say it with us, audience. Everybody at home listening. I heard the podcast. I heard the podcast. I heard the podcast. I heard the podcast. Wow.